Hello friends and Happy New Year! My name is Michelle Fondin and I'm the author of Help, I Think My Loved One is an Alcoholic, a survival guide for lovers, family, and friends. And welcome back to my YouTube channel. So 2019 is a very special year. Normally in my videos I'm not giving a year because the timeless wisdom that I give to you in my videos actually is timeless. So in 2020 or 2025, this wisdom is still going to be the same and apply in the same way. However, it's really special because I wrote this book, Help, I Think My Loved One is an Alcoholic, because of a particular person, a particular loved one in my life. And for the last 30 days plus, I think it's been 32 days, this particular person in my life has been sober and in recovery. And I'm going to go over the difference between being sober and being in recovery, which are two different things, even though it doesn't sound like they might be two different things, but they actually are two different things. And the difference this time is that this person in my life is totally committed to it. So if you've read my book, you know there had been attempts at sobriety, there had been attempts at going into recovery, but those attempts did not work those times. And I think it's third time's a charm. And for those of you in recovery, I did actually ask this person's permission before I did this video. Now, to keep his anonymity, I am not telling his name. I'd like to keep that private for him, and if at some point he'd like to join me on my YouTube channel, then he can tell you his name himself. But in my book, I refer to him as Johnny, and so I can use that name to refer to this particular person in my life in order to explain to you the dynamic of this relationship. So the title of this video is My Loved One is Getting Sober, and Now What for Me? Like, what is my role in this? How am I to react? How am I to be in this relationship with my alcoholic loved one? So first, let's go over the difference of sobriety versus recovery. So if your loved one is indeed an alcoholic, and remember, we qualify that relationship as any relationship. It could be a best friend, it could be a spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, significant other. It could be a mom, dad, brother, a child who is an alcoholic, aunt, uncle, someone who's close to you who just happens to have the disease of alcoholism. So if you want to learn more about the disease of alcoholism, go back to my prior videos, and also you can pick up a copy of my book where I do have a great description of what is alcoholism and just explaining it to you that it is in fact a disease. So sobriety is when an alcoholic or drug addict, they're really interrelated, because usually an alcoholic will elevate or escalate into drug use in tandem with the alcohol. So it's when an alcoholic or addict decides to stop drinking. Now, sometimes they might stop drinking cold turkey, or sometimes because of a disease such as liver disease or type 2 diabetes that they make the decision to stop drinking. So that is sobriety. Recovery, on the other hand, is being what we call in the rooms is being on program. So being on program means that you are attending meetings, either Celebrate Recovery or AA or Al-Anon or any other program. You could be in rehab. So you're attending meetings and you're following the 12 steps. Now, here's why I'm so stringent upon that when I say in recovery. Now, if you want to leave me comments about how you became sober and without a recovery program, good for you. And I don't say that so much sarcastically as I say that with a little bit of skepticism. Because in my book that I had interviewed so many alcoholics in recovery who had been in long-term recovery, and what I define as long-term recovery, I define as more than 2 years in recovery. 100% of them were in a recovery program. 100% that were successful in long-term recovery were on program. Those that say that they became sober without a program, what I have found and what others have found and what researchers have found is that they still hold on to those alcoholic traits in their personality, those traits that need to be healed. They still hold on to the lying, the tall tales, if you will, the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde attitude and personality. They're still full of anger. They're still full of spite. They're very egocentric. So all of those personality traits that are developed in the disease of alcoholism in an exacerbated state. I'm not going to say that people who are not alcoholics don't possess some of those same traits. I'm just saying that in alcoholism, they tend to be elevated. They tend to be exacerbated. And so those personality flaws or those personality traits that are not so favorable to those around you, they tend to be exacerbated in alcoholism. So in recovery, it's really important to address those issues, to address the suppression of emotions and feelings that were suppressed during the time of alcoholism, active alcoholism. And also those personality traits that cause a person to lie excessively and compulsively, or that compulsive behavior, the anger and the flippant attitude and the narcissism, all that's part and parcel of the disease of alcoholism and addiction that tends to be present in everyone across the board. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what age. It doesn't matter what gender. It doesn't matter what cultural background. Researchers have shown that there are similar traits in all addicts that are the same. So if your alcoholic decides to become what they call a dry drunk, but is not in recovery, that is not recovery. That's being a dry drunk. So they're still going to portray exactly the same personality flaws and the same codependent behavior that they portrayed in their drinking or drugging. So there you go. That is the difference between sobriety and recovery. So for real recovery, you need both. You need sobriety and recovery at the same time. Now, the other misconception that I talk about in my book is that an alcoholic can actually get it under control and stop drinking for a while and then go back to drinking. No, that's not possible. There is no such thing as managed drinking. It was a theory at one time, but if you are a true alcoholic or addict, there is no such thing as managed drinking. It just doesn't exist. If someone says that they are doing managed drinking, but they are in fact an alcoholic, they're just lying to you, and the compulsive behavior is still there. So there you go. So let's talk about the role that you play when your alcoholic is in earnest, sober, and in recovery. So it can be super confusing. You're like, oh my gosh, this doesn't feel right. And it doesn't feel right because you've dreamed about this for so long. You've had fantasies about it. You've had fantasies of having a normal relationship with your mom or your dad or your brother or sister or your boyfriend or girlfriend or spouse. Like, you've had these fantasies in your head of like, oh my gosh, if they just get sober, the relationship is going to be so perfect. It's going to be great. And everything is going to be peachy and it's going to be lovey-dovey and we're going to have a normal relationship and normal conversations and everything is going to be great. And that's not exactly what happens. So the dynamic between an alcoholic and someone who loves an alcoholic is a very dysfunctional dynamic. It's extremely unhealthy and extremely dysfunctional. And you might get insulted by that statement. You might think like, you know what, Michelle? I have worked on myself. I'm a normal person. I can function normally in daily life. I don't need alcohol to survive. I don't need a therapist. I don't need any of that. Like, I'm a normal person. I have normal relationships. That might be so. But when it comes to that dynamic of that particular relationship, it's such an unhealthy dynamic and it's such a unhealthy codependent type of relationship that the relationship itself must be completely broken down and then built up from the bottom up, because the dynamic of that relationship has always been unhealthy and it'll continue to be unhealthy if you don't change. So what's happening is that your alcoholic in recovery is actually changing the dynamic by virtue of A, being sober, B, being in a recovery program. So as they're becoming more and more sober, meaning that their brain is healing, because in the book I talk about the brain taking time to heal because the brain is so dependent on the chemicals in alcohol and drugs that the chemical reaction of the brain is totally transformed and different and changes. And so it takes up to 3 years for the brain actually to heal completely from the destruction of the alcohol or drugs. So that person's chemistry is changing, their brain is changing, their behavior is changing. So everything about them is completely transforming and changing. And by virtue of the recovery program that they're on, working the 12 steps, being with other people who are sober, attending meetings, finding a higher spiritual meaning or purpose, and finding a higher being, if you will, whether you call it God, spirit, universe, or higher consciousness, whatever you decide to call it, by virtue of that, that person is changing. So because that person is changing, the dynamic of the relationship is changing, whether you like it or not, for good or for bad, whether you like it or not, it's going to change. This can make people feel really uneasy. It might make you feel uneasy. You might feel like, oh my God, like I don't even know this person anymore. And I don't know if I love this person anymore. Or inversely, you might think like, I don't know if this person loves me anymore. So it can be really scary because you were used to the patterns of behavior being in a certain way. And now that the dynamic is changing, it can make you feel vulnerable and insecure. And it can make that person feel vulnerable and insecure when it comes to your relationship with that person. So if it's a parental relationship, or if it's a brother-sister relationship, or a blood relative, it might not feel as threatened as a boyfriend-girlfriend or spouse relationship, a relationship that was chosen, or a friendship, a best friendship that was chosen, versus being in a blood relationship, because you can't really choose your family. So it might feel a little bit threatened. So here is where your recovery comes into play. So even though I do say that Al-Anon is not for me, but the Al-Anon program itself is, meaning like I had a tough time with the meetings just because I like AA better. And I enjoy AA meetings better. And I did a whole entire video on this. Now, whether you believe that to be true or not true for you, it is what it is. I like AA meetings better than Al-Anon meetings. And I do like the Al-Anon literature and the programs themselves. So I like the program, I like the 12 steps, I like the literature. But if you have never attended a meeting, get yourself into a meeting. If your loved one is in recovery, or even if they're not, get yourself to some meetings. Find the best meetings for you. Start reading the literature, start working with a sponsor. It's not the same as going to therapy. It just isn't. It's not the same. Therapy is great, but it's not the same, because most therapists are not versed in addiction and recovery, and most of them, while they might have direct experience, it's not the same as experiencing other people who are actually in the middle of experiencing the same things as you. So it gives you that sense of camaraderie. It gives you that sense of connection to someone else who can actually understand what's going on. And I would say even attend a few AA meetings with your alcoholic loved one if you can, if you're nearby. And if you're not nearby, which my alcoholic loved one and myself were 3,000 miles away, he's on the East Coast, I'm in California, I had attended a lot of AA meetings with him in the past. So, and also I attended AA meetings to do research for my book. So you can attend AA meetings even if you're not in recovery for alcoholism or drug addiction. Just attend an open meeting and be truthful about it. You know, if they call on you to speak, just say, you know, I'm here to audit the meeting. I'm interested. I have a loved one who's an alcoholic, and I'm just here to listen. And that's totally fine. No one's going to make you speak at those meetings. So the first thing is that changing dynamic of the relationship, and you're feeling insecure, you're feeling vulnerable, get yourself into a recovery program. And don't fight it. Honestly, it's going to help your relationship with that other person if you can understand what they're going through, because it can be really hard for you to get what they are going through if you have no cognizance of it. You can't understand it intellectually. You have to actually feel what they're going through and empathize with them. So the other thing that may happen that may make you feel insecure is that they are going to be attending a lot of meetings. They're going to need to attend a lot of meetings, or they might be in rehab, or they might be in detox, but they're going to need to attend a lot of meetings in order to stay sober. And it's really hard to stay sober with the way life is. I mean, they've been used to suppressing their feelings with alcohol. So as soon as they stop drinking, guess what? Those feelings come up. And when those feelings come up, they don't know how to handle it because they've been used to drinking. when the feelings come up. So now they can't drink when the feelings come up, and so they need another way to be able to deal with those feelings. And the way they deal with those feelings are in meetings, because they hear other people telling their stories about their feelings that are coming up, and they're able to voice their own feelings about what is coming up and how to handle it and how to handle life, because alcohol is socially accepted everywhere. And when you're a person who's trying to recover and you go into a place, a social scene or a social situation where drinking is everywhere, and that's the only way you've been able to be in social scenes, it can be really hard to not be drinking and have to be social. And most alcoholics have social anxiety. So because they have social anxiety, they've dealt with it by drinking. Now that they're not drinking, they're still having the social anxiety. So they're going to be needing to attend a lot of meetings. And if this alcoholic is in your life on a daily basis, they're not going to be there as often. So while you had this fantasy built up where you're like, oh, they're going to be with me and it's going to be happy and they're going to be in love and everything's going to be great, and now they're all of a sudden not there, you're going to be like, great, it was better when they were drinking. At least they were passed out on the couch, but they were still with me. And so it can be a little disconcerting to have them away when you're like, wait a minute, I thought they were supposed to be back and like sane and sober and with me. So that is normal. What you need to do is find your own activities. Live your life. Find your activities. Do something. Create a hobby. Join a yoga class. Find your own way to entertain yourself now that you don't have to take care of the alcoholic loved one. So that's number 2. Number 3 is the relationship is going to be different in that you are not his or her mother, you're not his or her counselor, you're not his or her rescuer, you're not his or her God, if you will. That role that you took on in this codependent relationship where you were always rescuing this person in some way, shape, or form, or covering for them, or helping them out, or giving them money, or what we call enabling. You know, I hate that word, but that you were enabling that person, that can't happen anymore. So that you're their leader, you're their savior, you're their everything. It gave you a sense of purpose, but again, that's all part and parcel of the really, really, really dysfunctional part of the relationship. So you need to back off now and let them figure out things for themselves. And this is by far, I will tell you right now that this is by far the hardest part for me in the recovery of my loved one, of my alcoholic loved one. Even though we're 3,000 miles apart from each other, and even though the relationship is kind of in a jumble, because when I moved to California, shortly thereafter, we had mutually decided to not see each other anymore and not be in a relationship anymore, except for friendship. But I knew that I couldn't be with him while he was actively drinking and still an alcoholic. And the separation kind of forced that even more. So we had made the decision to just be friends and just, check in with one another and talk to one another, but not be in a relationship together. And so even though we're not in a love relationship together, even though we do love each other, it gets very confusing because of the dynamic that we call it like the dynamic dance, or that relationship dance that we all play in relationships with people that we're in. So it can be a very healthy dance if you're in a healthy relationship, or it can be a very unhealthy dance when you're in an unhealthy relationship, which all alcoholic relationships, no matter who you are definitely unhealthy. 100% unhealthy. Even if you consider yourself to be healthy in other relationships, in this one, it's unhealthy. It's definitely unhealthy. So as this relationship is transforming, because the person is transforming, you can still be compelled to be that person's rescuer, or be that person's savior, or be that person's professor or counselor, or something that you're always giving them advice. You should do this and not do this. You should attend more meetings Hello, I'm guilty of that. I will tell you right now. You should be getting a new sponsor. You should be doing A, B, C, or D. You know, if you're not attending 90 and 90, you're not doing your program. And for me, that is by far the hardest piece in all of this. And I'll tell you right now, part of it is because I know too much. I know too much because I wrote a book on alcoholism and recovery, and I've talked to dozens of alcoholics in recovery, and I've attended a lot of AA meetings and Al-Anon meetings. So I know too much, and because I know too much, it's unfortunate, but I know the program, and I know how the program works well, and I know how the program doesn't work well. But it's not my place to tell him that. It's not my place to counsel him. It's not my place to be his savior. It's not my place to tell him what he should and shouldn't do. He needs to figure that out for himself. And that is the hardest part of all this, you guys. And you might notice that for you, it's the hardest part too, because you've been used to telling your alcoholic loved one what to do and what not to do. Most of the time because they haven't been competent enough to be able to make those decisions for themselves, or they've been making really bad decisions. And because they've made such bad decisions, a lot of times in this dysfunctional relationship, you were always there to like kind of pick up the pieces of all the bad decisions that they made, or you've helped them do course correction from all the bad decisions they made. So that is like super duper hard, but it's really important that you allow them to fall down if they need to fall down. Just think about a baby who's learning how to walk. Like honestly, your alcoholic loved one in recovery, especially the first year, is like a baby learning how to walk. Like they're learning how to literally live life without alcohol. That is a huge, huge thing for most of them. Huge. Like for my alcoholic loved one, and he will tell you this on camera if he ever appears on camera, but he'll tell you this in real life, is that his entire adult life has been supported by alcohol. Like he will tell you this point blank. His entire adult life has been with alcohol. He has not had a portion of his adult life without alcohol. So this is brand new for him. It's new being able to discover life without alcohol as an adult. And of course, there were periods of more intense drinking than others, but all in all, his entire adult experience has been with alcohol. So this is brand new for him. So it's exactly like a child, a baby learning how to walk for the first time. So at first the parents are going to like hold the baby's hand and make sure that they can stand upright and they can walk and not fall and hurt themselves. But after a time, those parents are going to like let go and see if the baby can walk on its own. And if it falls, it falls. That's it. They're going to learn. They're going to learn to pull themselves back up and try again and walk again. It's the same way with your alcoholic loved ones. So just move out of the way and let them do their thing and don't be their savior. And I think that's the hardest part. The hardest part is that, because then you're not going to feel useful anymore. You're not going to feel like, oh God, what do I have to contribute to this relationship again? Because that was my role. That was my role the whole time. And so because of that, your feelings about the other person in that relationship may transform and change. And again, that's another scary part of the healing process of this relationship. And it's okay. It's okay to feel vulnerable. It's okay to feel like the dynamic is changing. It's okay to have doubts about the relationship itself. Give it time, because you never know how the relationship will transform. And have patience for that person, have compassion, have loving kindness for that person, even though they may still display the traits of a true alcoholic, which include self-centered behavior, narcissism, anger, flippant attitude, all of that, all of the above. They're going to have ups and downs in their emotions because A, it's really hard, B, because their body is still chemically dependent on alcohol to survive and function, and D, it's because they're experiencing so many new sensory experiences that they just don't know, like their central nervous system doesn't even know how to handle it. So because of that, it might come out as anger, it might come out as frustration, it might come out as lashing out at you. So the best thing you can do is just kind of like get out of their way, go find something to do, and encourage them to get to a meeting if it escalates. Like if it escalates into something that you can't handle and that person can't handle, or you're living with a person and you might feel like, okay, they're going to start drinking again if they don't get to a meeting, you might just gently suggest, and I'm not talking about this as you being their savior or rescuer, you might just like point it out like, hey, I noticed the anger has been kind of a lot today, so perhaps going to a meeting might help you with that, and then just like walk away. Like don't stand there and insist, just give the gentle suggestion and then just kind of like leave the room, leave the house, go shopping or something. So that's a constructive way in which you can help them if you find the emotions rising too much or just getting out of control. But other than that, their recovery process is their recovery process and yours is yours. And if you're under the illusion that you don't need to go through a recovery process when you have been in a relationship with an alcoholic, it's an illusion. You absolutely need a recovery process for this relationship, because in order for you to act differently and to behave differently and to understand the personality traits within yourself that have caused you to foster this codependent relationship, don't kid yourself. There are things you can improve upon. So get yourself into a program, read literature, pick up a copy of my book, and just so you can understand the disease better. But I am so happy for you if your loved one is in recovery and sober and they're on the road to living a life alcohol-free. And if you feel compelled also to live your life alcohol-free, to support that person, all the better. That's exactly what I did 4.5 years ago. I decided to not drink, and I didn't really even drink alcohol at the time, but you know, I said even one drink wouldn't be constructive. So I made that decision, and I'm happy with my decision. I support my decision, even though we're not in a love relationship together currently, but I wanted to support him in every way that I could, even when he was still drinking. So thank you so much for joining me. Please subscribe to my channel below, share this video with friends, family, and your yoga dog. And thank you for pledging your support on Patreon, www.patreon.com/Michelle S. Fondin, and I will see you in the next video.